When we think of the digestive system in humans, typically we just think of the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, and the different intestines. And the digestive system actually is the one-way path, the alimentary canal, and glands as well. So things that we don't typically think. So what are these glands? So salivary glands, we probably would think in our mouth. Pancreas, also liver, and the gallbladder. Here's the typical diagram that we see of the digestive system. I do very much like the schematic drawing off to the side. It shows the order of the organs from the mouth all the way down to the rectum and anus, with food leaving our one-way path. So please be familiar with this diagram, and also please know again that the digestive system does include those glands that are being shown. A lot of the digestive system and the body systems, a lot of this is memorization, so just knowing the name and the basic function. So two words that you should be familiar with are peristalsis, which is where food is pushed through in a rhythm. And this rhythm is due to the contractions of muscles in the wall of the canal, so the pathway from mouth to exiting. Another word that you should know are sphincters, and these are the valves that regulate the movement of material between the compartments. Now, between these two words, just kind of building on it, where is the digestion of macromolecules? Where does this take place as it's being pushed through in this rhythmic way? So in the mouth, digestion of carbs starts there. Stomach, main job is for proteins. The small intestine, picking up any carbs that didn't get digested, and proteins, and then fats and nucleic acids as well. The beginning of the digestive system begins with the mouth. The mouth is also known as the oral cavity, and what takes place in the oral cavity is mechanical and also chemical digestion. How does the chemical digestion take place? The salivary glands. So salivary glands are what makes saliva to lubricate the food and make it easier to travel through your digestive system. The teeth located in your mouth or your oral cavity helps to mechanically break the food into smaller pieces, so the chewing process is that mechanical digestion. Now, I said that the salivary glands is what makes saliva. What's in the saliva is an enzyme known as salivary amylase. And amylase breaks down glucose polymers, long chains of glucose. Things like starch, which we get from plants. Starch is a polymer of glucose, and glycogen, which is a polymer of the glucose molecules from animals. And saliva it also contains mucus, which sometimes mucus and saliva I use interchangeably, which mucus is a viscous mixture of water, salt cells, and also glycoproteins. Now, when we have chewed and the food is all mashed up, without even thinking, it goes to the back of our throat, which is known as the pharynx. And then we swallow the food, and it passes the food, which is now known as a bolus, passes by a flap of cartilage, which is going to cover the trachea when we swallow, because we certainly don't want any food or anything going into our trachea or windpipe into our lungs when we're eating. And then the bolus or food is now in our esophagus, which is the food tube, the space in between, or the tube in between the pharynx and the stomach. Here's a diagram illustrating the slide and some of the terms that you just saw on the previous slide. This shows the bolus of food from the mouth, entering into the back of our throat, or again called the pharynx, and then the epiglottis flap, protecting the trachea so food doesn't go into there, and then making its way down the esophagus and plopping into our stomach. Now, I don't know that it necessarily shows, it kind of shows the peristalsis, that like wave-like squeeze, release, squeeze, release. You kind of see it on the right-hand side, kind of. And then also the other thing that I don't think I mentioned on the last slide, again, the sphincter is that what regulates in between compartments. So please make sure that you know that. When the food exits the esophagus and makes its way into the stomach, there is digestion that's going to take place there. So the purpose of the stomach is to store food and to secrete gastric juice, which is going to convert the food into acid chyme. Now, what is chyme? Chyme is it's what you throw up when you're sick. So it's a pulpy gastric juice combination with partially digested food, and it's disgusting, basically, should it come out. Now, the gastric juice in your stomach is a combination of hydrochloric acid, which has an extremely acidic pH level, pH of 2, so a low pH value. And hydrochloric acid kills bacteria, which is good news, and it also denatures proteins. Now, once the proteins are denatured, they need to be broken apart. And there's an enzyme called pepsin, which is a type of protease enzyme. Protease is a enzyme that specifically digests proteins. And pepsin I can't even say it, hydrolyzes, proteins into smaller peptides by breaking those peptide bonds, by introducing water, hydrolysis, to those bonds. So the big question is, how doesn't the gastric juice eat away the stomach, dissolve your insides in your whole body? Like, what makes it, because it can dissolve so much, why doesn't it eat apart the stomach? The answer is because pepsin isn't active when your stomach basically needs to be triggered by the introduction of food. So pepsin is inactive, and it has a special name. It's called pepsinogen, and it's in an inactive form in the cells of your stomach. So you've got two cells working hand in hand with one another. When hydrogen and chlorine ions are released, that triggers pepsinogen to be released by another type of cell, and the two of them help to make pepsin active, which is a really aggressive enzyme if you're able to break those peptide bonds. Another way that the stomach doesn't get damaged is by having a layer of mucus protecting the lining of the stomach. Now, sometimes, things happen, and when the stomach lining gets damaged and there's lesions or abrasions, those are called ulcers. It wasn't really clear until the 2000s, like what was causing ulcers in the stomach, which causes a lot of digestive issues and pain for somebody who has it. There's a bacteria that's located in your stomach called Helicobacter pylori, and when treated with antibiotics, it helps with the prevention of ulcers. This is what I was trying to explain on the previous slide. I don't know if I did necessarily a good job at that. If you look at the bottom right, there's two types of cells, the pink versus the yellow. These two cells, parietal cells versus chief cells, these two cells work hand in hand to make the components of that gastric juice. So gastric juice being a combination of pepsin and hydrochloric acid. So you can see that the parietal cells are releasing hydrogen and chlorine ions, which are going to make a bond into hydrochloric acid. The chief cells keep together that pepsinogen inactivated. And when there's hydrochloric acid release, it triggers the other, and then together you have pepsin and the hydrochloric acid to break down the food in that really acidic pH 2 environment. Now we are entering into the small intestine, which is the major organ of digestion and absorption, and it's also 20 feet long. The reason I always hated that the small intestine was the skinny one and the large intestine is shorter, but it has to do with the diameter. It doesn't have to do with the actual length. So small intestine is the longer of the two intestines. Again, be named so because of the diameter. The first section of the small intestine has a special name. It is called a duodenum, which I always said duodenum, but duodenum. And here there's digestive juices, and it's the major part of the chemical digestion. Now, of these digestive juices, there are tons of different enzymes that are released because this is the main organ for digestion and absorption. So the gland that helps produce a lot of these enzymes for the small intestine is the pancreas. And some of the names of the different enzymes, bicarbonate is produced, which is a type of base, and it helps to neutralize the chyme because it just left the stomach and it's really acidic. Trypsin and chymotrypsin, these are also proteases. So proteases, again, are going to be enzymes that help to break down proteins. Lipases are the enzymes that help to break down fats. And there's something special. Well, fats are insoluble, so that it makes it a little bit difficult for these enzymes to break them down. In just a moment, I'm going to mention what helps the lipases to break down the fats. But amylase, again, I already mentioned that with saliva, helps to further break down carbohydrates, and nucleases break down DNA and RNA and enzyme targeting nucleic acids. Now, what I was just saying about fats being insoluble, they're really difficult for these enzymes to attack. Bile is made, and bile salts essentially surround the fat molecule, helping to assist in breaking it down. And bile's made in the liver, and it's stored in the gallbladder before it's released. And as I kind of just said, it emulsifies or breaks apart the fat molecules into smaller droplets. Here's a flowchart illustrating how these different macromolecules are digested or broken down into their subunits or monomers. So if you look at the green on the far left, showing you all the stuff I already basically covered in previous slides, but showing you carbohydrates, the breaking down begins in the oral cavity, kind of bypassing the stomach, and then really getting broken down in the small intestine. Protein digestion starting in the stomach, and then again further getting broken down in the small intestine. Nucleic acid digestion begins in the small intestine, as does fat digestion. Because the digestive system, or any organ system, needs to be a series of coordination, there are always hormones that help to coordinate any body system. And since we're on digestion, there are hormones that help to coordinate that. One type of hormone that coordinates digestion is gastrin. Gastrin is a hormone that's produced by the stomach, and what it does is it increases the production of gastric juices for digestion. Another type is enterogastrin, and this is produced by the small intestine, specifically the duodenum, and it decreases peristalsis, which is really important at this stage, that food gets digested properly, specifically fat digestion, because it's the hardest one to break down. Another two hormones that help to coordinate digestion, secretin and CCK cholecystokinin, which is secreted also by the small intestine and again the duodenum, and this increases the flow of digestive juices from the pancreas and the gallbladder. Now that digestion is pretty much complete, now nutrients need to be absorbed, and there are many microfolds and projections that are within the last part of the small intestine. These finger-like projections are called villi or villi, and microvilli or villi are the microscopic projections that increases surface area, and the more surface area you have in contact with the digested food, the more nutrients are going to be taken into those cells. So taking in nutrients is really important in the small intestine, and specifically in the villi. Once the nutrients are absorbed into those villi, where exactly do they go? So the villi has a tremendous amount of capillaries, or mini veins basically, running through them. And these capillaries converge all together in something known as a hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein basically feeds the nutrients to the liver, and the liver is going to do its job in making those nutrients get through the bloodstream and go through the heart. Now, the liver, not only does it help with getting the nutrients to where they need to go by distributing the nutrients, it also helps, as I think we learned a long time ago, about detoxing any sort of toxins that have been ingested, and then also for glucose storage in the form of glycogen as well. And again, I really like these simplified schematic diagrams because they can kind of show you on the bottom where the nutrients are being taken up by that hepatic portal vein, and where the liver kind of comes into play, feeding it to the veins to the heart. So again, these diagrams are a really good way to kind of have an understanding of, again, the beginning of the mouth, and then all the way on the way out. The last stop of the digestive system is the large intestine. The large intestine often is also known as the colon, even though there's some other parts to it. The function of the large intestine is to compact the waste that needs to be expelled and the final absorption of water. Now, this doesn't always pan out that way, absorbing water. So if we have any sort of infection, bacteria imbalance, virus, something isn't necessarily agreeing with us, the food needs to get out as fast as possible, and our large intestine is not able to absorb the water, and that is known as diarrhea. Now, on the other hand, maybe the food, or waste in this case, is hanging out a little too long in that large intestine or that colon. In that case, tons of water is going to be absorbed, and then the feces is really, really hard, which can lead to constipation because it can't move through that large intestine like it should. Now, other parts of the large intestine, the beginning is called the cecum. This is the pouch where the small intestine and the large intestine meet, and plant material needs to be fermented. Also, off the cecum, there's a extension, and something that's really unnecessary, the appendix. And this has a small minor role in immunity, And now the final step before the way out, the rectum, the end of the large intestine, and then feces is stored until final elimination. Ready?
Nothing.
Make sure you know
Make sure you know
what the jejunum
what the jejunum
and the ileum
and the ileum
are because
they will be
on your
on your
quiz.
kids.
Good luck on the quiz.
Good on the kids.
You're going to do great.
You're gonna do that.
Can't wait to find out
I can't wait to find out
what your transit times are.
why you shove it down.
What's your transit time?
Why you just
I was asking you. What's your transit time?
Hey, Superman.
Oh, Superman transit time? Yeah, it does. Okay, say good luck.
Good luck. Now I'm gonna sit to it.
Go ahead, you can say something.
Oh, I don't know.
Go ahead.
We both have it. Whoa.